My sister, consumed by jealousy, attempted to ruin my life. When I regained consciousness, I found myself reborn on the day our parents divorced. This time, my sister pushed me towards our father and then rushed into our mother's arms. Sister, now it's your turn to feel the suffering I endured, she said. But she didn't realize that someone capable could thrive anywhere, even in the harshest circumstances. I knew that, even in a hellish environment, I could forge my own path. Both my sister, Amelia, and I were reborn on the day our parents divorced. Sitting on the living room couch, my sister and I were in the middle, with our father in a suit on one side and our mother, who looked worn and unkempt, on the other. She was wiping away tears, crying, and pleading, but there was nothing she could do to make our father stay. After her cries, our father calmly presented the divorce papers. I had no desire to go with our father, who was hardly ever home. We barely saw him a few times a year, and he seemed like a stranger. The affection between our parents had long faded, but our mother still held on to hope. "Didn't you say you'd go with Dad?" she asked. Amelia, clinging to our mother, looked up with big, innocent eyes and said, "Mom, you raised me, of course. I'll always be with you. Let sister go with Dad and enjoy a good life. I'll stay with you and take care of you." Amelia's brave words left our mother stunned. Just the day before, she had openly declared that she was meant to be rich and would certainly choose our father. Now, in just a day, she changed her mind. Our mother, believing that her daughter had had a change of heart, was deeply moved and gazed at me with love, though a trace of disappointment lingered in her eyes. "Leave, you ungrateful child! I've raised you for years, and this is how you repay me!" she shouted. I took our father's hand and left without hesitation. As I reached the door, I felt my mother's gaze on my back. For all these years, her love for Amelia had not been in vain. Only I hadn't abandoned her. I curled my lips into a faint smile and thought, "Mom, you're so naive." In our past life, Amelia had eagerly chosen our father, leaving our mother heartbroken. She believed that by becoming the only daughter of a wealthy man, she would live a life of ease and affection. After all, our father had no other children. But just 3 months later, our father remarried, and our stepmother brought with her a son, Ethan. From then on, she criticized Amelia at every turn and even fired the nanny, forcing Amelia to take on all household duties. Amelia's life became like that of Cinderella's. At school, Ethan would intentionally seek her out in front of others, causing many girls who admired him to resent her. She was shunned and bullied, feeling that life had become unbearable. When our stepmother and father discovered her struggles, they only grew more disgusted. The stepmother accused her of attempting to seduce her son, while our father criticized her for lacking self-respect. After high school, our stepmother threw her out of the house, and our father said nothing. He had long since lost hope in her. Meanwhile, under our mother's care, I worked hard and progressed from being the worst student to the best. I gained admission to a top university in 2011 and continued on to become a doctor of nutrition. I published several papers, started my own health consulting firm, and helped many people improve their health and self-esteem. Our father reached out to me, inviting me to give lectures at his health product company, which unexpectedly boosted his sales. While I was being interviewed on TV, my sister, who had been struggling to find a job, became consumed by jealousy. She was so envious that her eyes reddened. Eventually, frustrated, she returned home, missing the warmth of maternal love. But our mother, seething with anger, grabbed her by the neck and spat out, "I treated you so well, but for the sake of wealth, you chose your father. Now, after all this, you have the nerve to come back. After cooking a meal for her, I left. But in the moment I wasn't looking, she secretly laced the food with pesticides. I saw her eyes go red, foam forming at her mouth. She died violently, blood streaming from every orifice. Then my consciousness faded, only to awaken once again on the day of that fateful choice. This time, Amelia chose our mother, a decision completely out of character for her. That was when I realized we had both been reborn. With a smug smile, she said, "Sister, this time it's my turn to receive all of Mom's love. You had your glory in the past life. Now, it's your turn to experience the betrayal of everyone." As expected, not long after, our stepmother moved in and began giving me orders, especially when our father was away. She demanded I clean the entire villa, with a nanny supervising me. The nanny, empowered by our stepmother, also bossed me around. While I mopped the floor, she snacked on melon seeds, dropping shells all over the place. When I cleaned the dishes, she criticized me and told me to redo them. In the evening, when I did laundry, she threw her uniform at me, ordering me to wash it too. This was all instigated by our stepmother. Once she had grown accustomed to controlling me, she fired the nanny and assigned all the household duties to me. But it didn't matter. I needed a quiet kitchen to focus on my diet and cooking research. Compared to my passion, a little hardship didn't faze me. Meanwhile, Ethan was more unpredictable and moody at home. He mostly stayed in his room, only coming out for meals. He barely acknowledged our father, and when we drove to school, he remained silent throughout the ride. At school, however, he became a completely different person. When there were crowds around, he deliberately approached me, acting affectionate. He ruffled my hair, asked me to buy him water, and even put his arm around my shoulders after school. But once we got in the car, his demeanor turned cold, and he distanced himself from me. Many girls at school were infatuated with him, and I often saw stacks of love letters in his drawer, which he would tear up and discard. When these girls saw him getting close to me, they seethed with jealousy. They spread rumors that I was a clingy bootlicker. Before long, I was targeted in much the same way my sister had been in our past life. At the cafeteria, someone deliberately bumped into me, spilling food all over the floor. My stool was smeared with glue for no reason. One day, as I went to the bathroom, someone dumped a basin of cold water over my head. When I came out, soaked, I saw Amelia and a group of girls laughing maliciously. Amelia had now become part of the rich clique she had once despised, and she looked every bit the arrogant rich girl. I grabbed the dirty water bucket and marched toward them, splashing it over their faces and clothes. The screams that followed echoed in the bathroom as they fled in panic. Amelia, who had been grinning moments before, quickly rushed to the door, wiping her face in a panic. Dragging my drenched clothes back to the classroom, I found a fresh school uniform placed neatly on my desk. My eyes scanned the room, settling on the 5 girls, all absorbed in their studies. Eventually, the girl named Diana, sitting in the front row, turned around and gave me a faint smile. I instantly understood, and memories from my past life came rushing back. In that elite school, there were essentially 2 groups. Most of the students were either wealthy or from noble families, having gained entry through their family connections or money. There was also a small group of students who were admitted based on their exceptional academic achievements, like Diana. These students typically came from average families and didn't quite belong at the school. In my previous life, neither my grades nor my background were anything to be proud of, and I couldn't make any real progress at the school. It was Diana who took the initiative to invite me into a study group of 5, which was how I managed to go from being the worst student to becoming one of the top performers. In fact, Diana had also offered her uniform to Amelia, who was being bullied in the previous life. But Amelia was too absorbed in her dreams of becoming a wealthy girl to accept. She rejected Diana's gesture and even stomped on the uniform when it was offered to her. After that, Diana never tried to help her again. Now, Amelia purposely distanced herself from Diana and the others, choosing instead to try to gain favor with the rich girls who had bullied her in the past. To fit in with them, Amelia bought expensive designer bags, skipped classes to party, never did her homework, and handed in blank exam papers, fully embracing the life of a spoiled rich girl. After school, the large house was empty, as my father, stepmother, and Ethan were all out at a dinner party. I changed into a silk pajama, set up my phone in the kitchen, and made an anti-inflammatory and whitening drink from scratch. Then I posted a video of the process on my account. I enjoyed cooking, but in my previous life, my mother never allowed me into the kitchen, and I never had the opportunity to work with high-quality ingredients. This time, my father deposited my allowance into my account every month, and I could use it to buy whatever ingredients I needed, reporting the costs directly to my stepmother. These were things that had been out of reach in my previous life. After the nanny left, I was free to display my skills in the kitchen without restrictions. I then relaxed in a bubble bath while sipping my homemade health tea. In my past life, whenever my mother saw me in the kitchen, she would become furious. "Why don't you go study instead? Why are you in the kitchen? Do you want to be a cook for the rest of your life? Can't you be more ambitious?" Most of the time, I was locked in my room to study while my mother kept a close watch on me through the door crack. Originally, I could have attended a normal high school, but my mother, out of spite, insisted that I go to the same prestigious high school as Amelia. As a result, most of the money from the divorce was spent on the high tuition fees, and soon my mother and I were living a hand-to-mouth existence. However, Amelia had no idea about any of this. She thought my mother and I lived a harmonious life full of love and respect, when in fact, it was more like mutual suffering. No one knew that my mother had never gotten over the divorce. She became obsessive, trying to find fame and success through my education as a way to take revenge on my father and sister. My own mental state was deteriorating. Later, with Diana's support, my grades improved and I became a top student. But my mother's behavior only grew more extreme. After I passed the college entrance exam and entered university, she rented an apartment near the school to constantly watch me. She was terrified that I would live an ordinary life, or worse, that I would become successful and abandon her like my father had. As a result, she developed severe anxiety and depression, often mistaking me for my sister, attacking me in fits of rage. But there was no escape for me. I was the only daughter left in her life. Although I appeared to be thriving in the eyes of others, my life was a chaotic mess, tightly controlled by my mother's stifling love. Now, it was Amelia's turn to experience this suffocating existence. The next day at school, I placed the homemade tea I had prepared on the desks of Diana and the others. They paused for a moment before quietly thanking me. Later that day, they invited me to study together in the library. Noticing Diana's dark circles and the pimples appearing on the other girls' faces, I used my free time to teach them about the importance of a balanced diet and maintaining a healthy schedule. During breaks, I took them running or to work out instead of just focusing on practice questions. They were all top students and didn't need help with their studies, but what they lacked was inner confidence. The rich girls were outgoing, speaking freely and laughing, living a carefree life. In contrast, the study group of 5 was shy, always keeping their heads down. In my previous life, All 5 members of our study group were admitted to prestigious universities. But after graduating and starting to work, they struggled to pursue higher positions due to their backgrounds and life experiences. They never felt worthy enough, and this lack of confidence held them back. Some married hastily, while others spent their lives stuck in office cubicles. Poverty is not a sin. Everyone is born equal and has the right to pursue beauty and enjoy life. In this life, I not only want to save myself, but I also want to make the lives of those hardworking students shine brightly. At the same time, I had to face increasing bullying. Someone carved offensive words in large letters on my desk. I quietly took out my bag, and when Ethan wasn't around, swapped desks with him. As for the creepy crawlers in my pencil box and the dead mice in my school bag, I carefully moved them into Ethan's bag. His aloof and cool persona quickly crumbled, and for the first time he shouted angrily at me in the classroom, "Elizabeth, you're crazy!" "Oh, weren't you pleased when you bullied me? Why can't you handle it now?" Since Amelia had been skipping classes with the rich girls every day, her grades naturally dropped. At first, the teachers patiently urged her to study harder, given her ordinary family background. But Amelia saw their comments as mockery, so she ignored their advice and continued to do as she pleased. Eventually, the teachers gave up on trying to help her. With the support of Diana and the others, along with the solid foundation I had built in my previous life, my grades quickly improved. The teacher praised me in front of the class, and the 5-person study group applauded my progress with enthusiasm. I noticed that Amelia, sitting at the back, was grinding her teeth in frustration. The days passed by peacefully, but the only strange thing was the increasing closeness between Amelia and Ethan. When the driver took us home, Ethan would stop the car midway, and Amelia would wait for him at the intersection. In the past, they were enemies, but now it seemed like they had reconciled. I couldn't figure it out at first, but when I saw that they no longer tried to avoid me and began giving me cold, spiteful looks, everything clicked. They had teamed up. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. On Monday, during physical education class, I entered the equipment room, and within moments, I heard the door slam shut behind me. I turned to find a thin figure standing in the doorway. Ethan, with his hands in his pockets, was glaring at me with an air of superiority. I could feel something bad was coming. Whenever Ethan approached, trouble always followed. I tried to speak, but he ignored me and blocked the door with a firm stance. I attempted to maneuver around him, but he moved every time to prevent me from passing. "You're crazy," I said. Instead of getting angry, he smiled and replied, "Just wait a little longer. The time hasn't come yet." He glanced at his watch and added, "Elizabeth, you're finished. I'm curious to see how long you'll keep acting so arrogant. What do you think everyone will think if they find a man and a woman alone in this room? If this gets to my mother and your father, do you think you'll get away with it?" I realized then that this was the same trap they had used before. When Amelia and Ethan's close relationship became apparent in the past life, my stepmother had done everything she could to drive Amelia out of the family, and my father had lost all respect and hope for her. Now they were trying the same tactics again. If they could prove that I was trying to seduce Ethan, being expelled from school would be the least of my problems. In the worst case scenario, I could even be kicked out of the house. "Why are you targeting me? Is it because you want my family's inheritance?" I asked, mocking him. "How ridiculous. My father is running multinational businesses overseas. Do you really think I'd care about your family's tiny wealth?" Ethan's eyes filled with rage as he responded, "If it weren't for your father, my parents wouldn't have divorced. He's a homewrecker, and the daughter of a homewrecker is just as bad." He gritted his teeth with venom as he spoke, clearly filled with deep hatred for my father, and I was the one bearing the blame. I casually responded, "Oh, really? You're such a coward. You won't say anything in front of my father, but you act so tough in front of me. If you're really that capable, go take it up with him." Ethan's face twisted in anger and his fists clenched at his sides. I instinctively took a step back, knowing better than to provoke him further. Just then, I heard footsteps approaching from outside the room. They grew louder, and soon, Amelia's voice rang out. "Teacher, I just saw Elizabeth and Ethan going into the equipment room together. Could they be in a relationship? It's so dark in there. What are they doing inside?" Hearing her, Ethan continued to press me hard, and soon I was backed into a corner. He grabbed my shoulders firmly, and a malicious grin spread across his face. As I struggled, he suddenly bent down toward me. Acting quickly, I lifted my knee and struck him hard in the groin. Ah. Ethan bent over in pain, curling up like a shrimp. Seizing the opportunity, I kicked him down, straddled him, and began to punch his handsome face repeatedly. Soon, his face was covered in bruises, red marks, and blood from his nose, staining the floor. While I was focused on hitting him, the door to the equipment room slowly creaked open, letting a beam of sunlight shine on my back, as if I were a star on stage. I sat with my back to the door, pointing at Ethan on the ground. I intentionally messed up my hair and made it look disheveled, adding a hint of grievance to my voice. "How could you do this to me? I've told you repeatedly that we're not right for each other and that I don't like you at all, but you just wouldn't listen. I never expected you to be such a beast, pretending to be human. You followed me into the equipment room and tried to assault me. If I hadn't fought back, you would have succeeded." Ethan, stunned and unable to speak clearly because of the blood in his mouth, tried weakly to reach out, as if asking for help. The sunlight shining through the door seemed to illuminate all the dark corners. Behind me, I heard gasps of shock. I turned just in time to see Amelia, the head teacher, and a group of classmates standing at the door, all frozen in disbelief. Even Amelia covered her mouth in surprise. Before anyone could react, I staggered to my feet, wiped my tears, and pushed through the crowd, acting as though I was deeply ashamed. I ran away, leaving everyone stunned, staring at my retreating figure and Ethan, who was battered on the floor. The students' minds must have been racing, trying to process what had just happened. Amelia was the first to react. She hurried to help Ethan up, and he seemed to relish in the sympathy. Ethan had intended to manipulate public opinion to frame me, but now he would taste the true power of public opinion. After Ethan returned from the infirmary, the teacher called me to the office. The situation was even more dramatic than I expected. The head teacher, the dean, and the principal were all present. My stepmother, upon hearing that Ethan was injured, rushed to the school immediately. She was sitting on the sofa, holding the weak Ethan in her arms, glaring at me with venom in her eyes. When my father learned that Ethan had been hurt, he didn't want to come at first. But when he found out it was me who had beaten him, he didn't make a scene either. However, he couldn't resist my stepmother's pleas to punish me, so he finally put down his work and came. He placed his arm around her shoulder to comfort her, his face unusually calm. It was during break, and students were peeking out from behind the door and windows, eager to see how this drama would unfold and whether their idol would lose his shine. The dean of teaching spoke first, asking, "Tell us what happened." I looked around, lowered my head, and sighed, not wanting to speak. This incident had shaken me to my core. I never imagined Ethan could be this kind of person. He had been pursuing me for so long, causing me nothing but trouble both at home and at school. I was at my breaking point. Julian instructed us to gather the equipment, and just as I was about to leave, Ethan suddenly blocked my path. He pushed me into a corner, and I began to cry. He then put his arm around my shoulders and tried to kiss me. Left with no choice, I fought back. "You're lying," Ethan snapped, his anger rising as he stomped his foot. "Then tell us why you two were alone in the equipment room together." The dean of teaching glared at Ethan sharply. "We just went to the equipment room together." Ethan shrugged nonchalantly. "We've been together for a while, so we decided to go there for a date." The head teacher raised an eyebrow, noticing something odd. "Then how did you end up like this?" she asked. "We had a small argument," Ethan replied. "She just hit me a bit too hard." I retorted, "I've already told you I don't like you. What couple fights like that?" I added, "If you keep bothering me, I won't be with you either." The words sparked a heated discussion outside the door. "So it turns out Ethan's the one chasing her like a dog, and now he's been beaten up and still defends her?" someone whispered. "I can't believe it. My idol's such a shameless bootlicker." There was still no clear answer to the situation, and two possibilities remained. One was that Ethan and Amelia were in a relationship, and we'd all been tricked. The other was that Ethan, unable to win the affection of the girl he loved, had forced Amelia in the equipment room. Oh my God, this is shocking! The stepmother could no longer sit idly by, seeing her son at a disadvantage. "No matter the reason, you shouldn't have beaten my son like this. You're so cruel," she cried. "Auntie, I was only defending myself," I said, feeling wronged. "Do you want your son to succeed in what he was trying to do?" "I know my son. He would never do something like that," the stepmother shot back, glaring at me. "You've tarnished my son's reputation with your baseless accusations. It's you who seduced him and are now distorting the truth." The stepmother was sharp, and I had no proof to back up my claim that Ethan had molested me, just as Ethan had no proof that we were in a romantic relationship. The situation hit a standstill with both sides sticking to their versions. "I can prove that what Ethan said is true." Amelia stepped forward from the crowd, her voice confident. "I saw Elizabeth and Ethan enter the equipment room together. I got suspicious and called the teacher." Amelia's words confirmed that Ethan and I had indeed been alone in the room. The head teacher immediately supported her statement. Ethan, now smug, said, "We did go together. I just didn't expect we'd fight over something so trivial, and she even hit me. I didn't fight back because I didn't want to hurt her." Ethan's true character was revealed. And the dean of teaching and principal exchanged looks, sensing that they wanted to resolve this quickly. They were willing to sacrifice me to put an end to the situation. Meanwhile, my father, barely paying attention, was absorbed in replying to text messages on his phone, completely indifferent to the drama unfolding. Just as the principal was about to make a decision, I reached into my pocket and prepared to bring out my recording pen. Suddenly, there was a sharp knock on the door. Diana, standing nervously at the door, stepped inside, clutching her clothes. "Everything Elizabeth said is true." Ethan followed her into the equipment room. "Here's the evidence," she said firmly. I was surprised, as this wasn't the evidence I had planned. Diana then took out her phone and played a video. The video began with me entering the equipment room alone. A few seconds later, Ethan and Amelia appeared, whispered something to each other, and then Amelia walked away while Ethan entered the room. "I was just trying to take a photo of the scene, but I accidentally recorded everything that happened in front of the room," Diana explained. After the video played, Ethan's lies were exposed, and no one doubted my version of events anymore. The fact that Ethan and Amelia had conspired together was also revealed. Should we call the police now? I broke the silence. The stepmother's eyes widened in disbelief. "You're crazy. He's already been beaten by you. What else do you want?" she snapped. She looked to my father for support. "Can't you control your daughter?" she asked. My father finally spoke, his tone indifferent. "This is a family matter. Let's handle it at home. There's no need to involve the police." The principal let out a sigh of relief, relieved to avoid making the situation public. In the end, the decision was made that Ethan would go home for a month to recover, as a mild punishment. Before leaving, my father stopped beside Amelia. "I'll personally call your mother and ask her how she raised you," he said coldly. Amelia's eyes widened in fear. "Dad, don't call her. I don't have a daughter like you," she whispered. My father showed no mercy, and as he put his arm around my shoulders, I could see Amelia's eyes burning with hatred from behind me. Later that evening, I received a notification on my phone. It was a transfer from my father, 50,000, with 3 simple words: "Well done." My father had long been fed up with Ethan, who constantly ignored him and acted arrogantly. To avoid embarrassing the stepmother, my father had never criticized Ethan. However, my actions had served to release his frustration. Though that wasn't my intention, those who manipulate situations through public opinion will eventually face its backlash. Ethan was a prime example. After the incident in the equipment room, Ethan's fans turned on him. When he recovered and returned to school, he was greeted with disdain. The admiration he once received was replaced by contempt. His desk, once filled with love letters, was now filled with notes of abuse. As for Amelia, after her and Ethan's plan was exposed, she could no longer fit into the rich girls' circle. They saw through her true nature and declared they would no longer be her friends. Now, both she and Ethan were shunned by everyone. Meanwhile, our study group of 5 stayed focused on our studies, maintained healthy routines, ate well, and exercised regularly. Diana, puzzled, asked, "We're working hard to get into a good university. Isn't there anything more important than studying right now? Why not spend this time doing more practice questions?" I replied, "Are you sure that once you get into a good university, life will be perfect? Will you love yourself just because of your exam scores? Can you stand before those rich second-generation kids and say you're better than them?" They lowered their heads, reflecting. "I don't deny the importance of studying," I continued, "but to study well, we first need to have healthy bodies and sustained energy. Everyone, no matter how poor, deserves the right to shine and pursue beauty, health, and all the good things life has to offer. Good grades are important, but cultivating ourselves, our health, wisdom, and mentality is the key to breaking free from our circumstances." They seemed to understand, though some still looked a little confused. Yet I could see the spark of realization in their eyes. A few months later, the changes in our study group were obvious. The once oily skin had cleared up, acne disappeared, and they all had slimmer waists. Their improved fitness and energy levels had dramatically increased their study efficiency, and their grades reflected it. Our skin kept improving, while the rich girls, during breaks, had to apply heavy layers of makeup just to cover up their large pores. Even with blush, their sallow complexions, due to extreme dieting, were hard to hide. When they noticed our visible changes, their eyes filled with envy. The previous sense of superiority they had over us began to crack, and finally, one of them couldn't hold back and asked, "How do you take care of yourselves? How did your skin improve so much?" Diana smiled and answered, "Actually, it was Elizabeth who taught us about healthy eating and self-care." She then pulled out her phone and said, "Look, this is her short video account. There are many healthy diet tips for weight loss on it, and you can learn from her videos. With some time, I believe you can do it too." The girls were immediately excited. "Elizabeth, you're the blogger I've been following. I'm such a fan." They gathered around me, surrounding me like stars around the moon. Outside this circle, Amelia stood, her face dark with anger. What's there to be proud of? You're just some blogger. You may be popular here, but you're just a servant at home. What good is having a nice appearance? I knew she was right. My home life had been getting harder. It seemed like Amelia had a hand in it. Ethan would lose his temper at home, especially when my father wasn't there. At the dinner table, he would deliberately knock over the food I prepared. Then, with red eyes, order me to lick it off the floor. My stepmother simply watched silently. I would quietly get up and leave. Ethan would shout, "Don't you understand? I told you to clean it up like a dog. Got it?" I refused. "No, I won't do it." "Why don't you show me how it's done?" he demanded, his anger making his eyes seem bloodshot. He was about to charge at me with raised fists, but I grabbed a mop and pushed it against his chest. Then I pointed to the corner of the ceiling and said, "There's a camera here. If you hit me, I'll take the footage straight to the police. Do you want to be arrested for assault?" Ethan stopped, his neck veins bulging. My stepmother quickly pulled him back. "Don't stoop to her level, son. A wise man doesn't fight when the odds are against him," she advised, recognizing the shift in the situation since the school incident. My father had started being critical of both Ethan and her. After a loud noise from Ethan's room, half an hour later, the stepmother came out with red eyes, clearly distressed. Ethan was agitated, his emotions erratic. He shot me a glare full of hatred, but couldn't act on it. All he could do was destroy things. When my father returned and saw the mess, he sighed deeply and suggested that the stepmother take Ethan to see a psychologist. She was torn, balancing constant apologies to my father with attempts to calm Ethan. Her face grew more haggard by the day. She became so anxious about managing Ethan's emotions that she barely paid attention to my father when he came home. After nearly 2 weeks of his absence, she finally snapped. "Do you have someone else?" she asked desperately. "What nonsense are you talking about?" my father replied, rubbing his temples. "You've been coming home less and less. Do you know how hard it is to be here alone, taking care of Ethan, who's on the edge? It's all because of your daughter that he's like this." My father responded, irritated. "Your son has problems of his own. It has nothing to do with anyone else. Besides, when he made trouble before, I was the one who kept Elizabeth from pursuing the matter." The stepmother couldn't listen to this and burst into tears. "It's all your fault. Your daughter's a troublemaker. She's ruined my son, and you're still defending her. Don't you care about our marriage at all?" In that moment, she sounded like my biological mother, complaining bitterly, completely losing her previous grace. My father stood, grabbed his suit, and began to leave. "You want to leave me now? Go find someone else like you said before. Didn't you promise you only loved me? How can you break your word now?" She stopped him, tears in her eyes. "I think you've lost your mind." Just as they reached an impasse, Ethan stormed in without a word. He immediately rushed up and punched my father in the face. "You ruined my family. You married my mother and still wanted an affair. You deserve to die." The intense hatred Ethan had for my father exploded at that moment. The stepmother quickly hugged Ethan, then turned toward my father with tears in her eyes. "Ethan's not in his right mind. Please don't take it personally," she pleaded. My father wiped the blood from his mouth, his patience finally breaking. "You both pack your bags and leave tomorrow." The stepmother's face went blank, and she collapsed, staring at my father as he walked out. Tears rolled down her face as Ethan continued to shout, "Fine, we'll leave. Who's afraid of you? Do you think we care about living here?" She sobbed alone in her room. I knocked on her door, and without waiting for an answer, I entered. The stepmother was startled. "What are you doing here?" she asked. I smiled and replied, I know you and my father still have feelings for each other and don't want a divorce, but things have gone too far to turn back. If you want to stay with him, you'll need to give up some things. What things? She asked, confused. My father's a man who values his reputation. After what I started, but her response was lost in the noise of her growing distress. The situation at home had become increasingly difficult for Ethan, and there was no longer a place for him in the family. The stepmother grew quiet, becoming more distant from him each day. It was clear that a choice had to be made, and I was simply clarifying things in advance. As expected, the following morning, the driver took Ethan to the airport. Meanwhile, my stepmother, who had clearly made an effort to dress up, wore bright red lipstick and looked significantly better. She even went to the kitchen to cook, which was something I had never seen before. When my father returned, she personally took off his suit and helped him change into his slippers. I thought it over last night, she began, speaking gently. Ethan's behavior has become completely unacceptable. His condition is interfering with our daily life. So, I reached out to his biological father abroad and told him about the situation. He has agreed to let Ethan go overseas for more specialized psychological treatment. This decision is best for both Ethan and us. My father, who had been reluctant before, seemed to soften. I made some mistakes too, he said. I spoke too harshly last night. He paused, picked up his food with chopsticks, but then put it down again, distracted. I didn't come back these past few nights because the company has been facing some serious issues. A large batch of goods in the factory is unsellable, and the cash flow has been difficult. The senior management team has been meeting every day, trying to figure out how to move the inventory. It's really like when you're exhausted and someone hands you a pillow, he said with a sigh. His health product company, which had been doing well, was now struggling. Traditional sales methods were no longer effective due to the rise of short video and live streaming trends. I saw an opportunity. Dad, I can help sell the goods. I promise I'll clear the inventory in a week. My father stared at me in disbelief. You really think it's that easy? You can't just boast and expect results. Why not let me give it a try? I replied confidently. You've got nothing to lose. My father, in a desperate state, reluctantly agreed. I had over 1 million followers on my short video account, where I shared daily meal plans. A few days after I posted videos about health products, my followers were asking where to buy them. I quickly launched a live stream where I talked about health concepts and featured the products in the shopping cart. Within just 1 week, the sales had exceeded what my father's company had achieved in 6 months, and the goods were completely sold out. The demand was so high that we couldn't keep up with the supply. That evening, my father was beaming with joy. He opened a bottle of Lafite wine, clearly thrilled. I really didn't expect this. You've solved our company's problem that we've been dealing with for so long. Without this, we could have faced bankruptcy. You've saved us, he said. Both my father and the stepmother raised their glasses in a toast. Elizabeth is the hero of our family, my father said. She turned our losses into profits effortlessly. He put his glass down, smiling at me. We can't let Elizabeth keep cooking. That's wasting her talent. He glanced at the stepmother and added, I'm not fond of the food you make either. Hire a nanny as soon as possible. The stepmother smiled back and said, I've already contacted one. Don't worry. But I enjoy cooking. Besides, I can't stop updating my short videos, and I prefer not to share the kitchen with anyone. I immediately made my request. Dad, I need to go back to school tomorrow to fill out the college application form. Can you accompany me? He smiled and patted my head. Of course I'll go with you. Your aunt will come too to show support. It was a stark contrast to when he never attended any parent meetings during my high school years. Now, he was putting his work aside for me. In the adult world, talking about emotions doesn't carry as much weight as talking about business and interests. And I had learned that lesson well. When I showed my transcript with a score of 710, both my father and stepmother were shocked. My father had never really paid attention to my grades before. He always assumed I was like Ethan, lazy at school. Our family must have done some good deeds in a past life, he muttered, stunned. Finally, there's someone with real talent in the family. On the way back, my stepmother enthusiastically linked arms with me, and my father held my hand. Amelia, who was standing in the shade, watched the scene with intense jealousy and anger. A few days later, my father transferred the commission from the sales, nearly 1 million yuan, to me. While in college, I started my own health management company. Diana, who had been accepted into a food science and technology program at a nearby university, joined my company to help develop healthy snacks. I took charge of the business side, using the connections I had made in high school to secure our first clients. The rich girls, now aware that we had started a company, rushed to become the first clients. Thanks to continuous introductions, I began attending various social gatherings with wealthy people. Within a year, I had established myself in high society, and our company's client base grew significantly. My business started to thrive exponentially. One day, while I was visiting a client, I unexpectedly ran into Amelia, who was working at a roadside beverage stand. In my past life, Amelia had failed miserably in the college entrance exam. She didn't study hard, and in this life, her recklessness only deepened. She barely managed to get into a regular junior college. The tuition fees for the elite high school had drained our mother's savings, and when Amelia went to college, our mother could not only not afford the tuition, but also had to take medicine year-round due to mental health issues. Our financial situation was extremely tight, and there was no other option. The delicate girl, who had never worked a day in her life, had no choice but to find a job. At that point, I had already achieved success. I drove a sports car, wore custom suits, and stood before Amelia looking polished and sophisticated. I didn't have time to reminisce about the past. The appointment with my client was approaching. Unexpectedly, Amelia grabbed me looking pitiful. Sister, are you leaving without even saying hello? Do I disgust you that much now that you're successful? You look down on your own sister. Mom is sick, and we need money for her treatment. But you don't care at all. Are you really that heartless? You excluded me in high school, and now that you're prosperous, you don't care about family at all. I glanced at my watch, not wanting to waste any more time. I quickly shook off her hand and walked away without looking back. I didn't notice the subtle smile that began to form at the corners of her mouth or the phone she was hiding in her coat pocket. When I heard that our mother was unwell, I decided to visit her. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was filled with suspicion. I got straight to the point. "I heard you were sick, and Amelia is struggling to pay for her tuition. Here," I said, holding out a bank card. But before I could finish my sentence, I was slapped across the face. "What are you doing? You're a snob now? You come here to humiliate me? Amelia told me you're doing well, but so what? You're nothing in my eyes. You're just relying on your father. What real skills do you have? Unlike Amelia, who is self-sufficient, you're not even worth a strand of her hair. Take your filthy money and get out of here." She slammed the door shut, and I walked away, feeling like I had done all I could as a daughter. A few days later, a video went viral online. The video captured the moment Amelia grabbed me to complain, and I pushed her hand away coldly. Edited to emphasize her vulnerability, it painted me as a heartless person. The contrast between two sisters, one a rising star in the business world and the other struggling with college tuition, attracted a lot of attention. With Amelia's victimized comments, the video gained widespread support. That night, as the hashtag elder sister squeezing younger sister's resources topped the trending list, Amelia started a live stream. She was still in the beverage store uniform, her black hair loose and eyes slightly red, looking so pitiful that it evoked sympathy. I started this stream because I saw all the negative comments online about my sister, she began. Actually, my sister isn't a bad person. She's just a bit cold. Please don't attack her anymore. It's having a negative impact on her company. Her voice wavered as she spoke. The things that happened in high school are in the past. We were young, and it wasn't intentional that my sister led others to isolate me. It was because I couldn't handle the pressure and couldn't bear the blows, so I fell behind in my studies and developed psychological issues. I'm currently taking medication for my treatment. I just hope my sister can visit our mother, who has been longing to see her. Mom's health has declined due to missing her, but my sister is too busy and hasn't come back even once. I was painted as the unforgivable sinner, while Amelia was the innocent victim. The comments flooded in, criticizing me. Born from the same mother, how could she treat her sister like this? She's heartless. Now that she's rich, she's abandoning her own mother and sister. The comments got worse, calling for my company to fail. As I read through the hateful messages, Diana rushed into my office, gasping for air. Is your sister out of her mind? She's trying to bring down our company. A few clients have already said they're going to cancel their contracts. Then let them cancel, I replied nonchalantly. Diana was taken aback, raising her eyebrows. Aren't you worried? She asked. What's there to worry about? Can false accusations really become the truth? The business began to decline rapidly. More and more clients proposed terminating their contracts, and Diana became frantic. She scolded me. You're acting like the emperor while the common folk are in a panic. But I remained calm. This is just free advertising for me, I said, taking a sip of tea. With all this attention, how much would I have to pay for this kind of promotion? Amelia live-streamed every night, repeating the same story, painting herself as the victim and accusing me. She looked so pitiful, and with each broadcast, her audience sent her gifts and tips. The income from her streams quickly outpaced her part-time job. Within a month, she gave up the job and focused entirely on live streaming. She didn't have any special talents, but could make money simply by pretending to be a victim. Naturally, she didn't want to work hard. She was determined to push my company to its limits, to force me into a corner. Whether in this life or the previous, she always saw me as her rival and tried every possible way to ruin me. But now, I had no intention of holding back. I decided to analyze Amelia's claims during her live stream. First, she accused me of isolating her in high school, which led to her falling behind in her studies. After our parents' divorce, our mother missed me greatly, but I had never visited her. As I found success in my career, I became increasingly cold-hearted. How foolish of her to think she could turn the situation around with just her words when I had so much evidence in my possession. If she's intent on destroying me completely, then I won't hold back. I looked over the proof I had gathered, including evidence of Amelia's affair, and immediately posted everything online. While Amelia was happily streaming, the number of viewers suddenly spiked. She was thrilled, thinking she was gaining popularity again. But little did she know, she was about to be fully discredited. The viewers who flooded into her livestream were no longer supportive fans, but haters who bombarded her stream with comments of disdain. They had seen through her facade, and the comments were filled with insults. Green tea liar. Get out of here. I can't believe I trusted her. The barrage of criticism flooded in. Her mother doesn't seem sick at all. She's cruel to her own daughter. Her sister is truly pitiful. Amelia was stunned. Faced with the overwhelming wave of abuse, she quickly shut down the stream. She only learned the full story later, but it was too late. She wasn't just cyberbullied. Her dream of live streaming had been completely shattered. Thanks to Amelia's publicity, my company became a hot topic again, drawing more attention online. More people came to us out of admiration, and our client base grew steadily. Soon, our company became a leader in the industry. While Diana and I were preparing to attend an industry summit, Amelia, with a swollen and red face, suddenly charged at me, holding a knife. I instinctively held my bag up in front of me, and the security guards reacted immediately, subduing Amelia before she could reach me. Everyone in the area gasped in shock. Amelia struggled fiercely, shouting, "Elizabeth, I'll kill you. It's your fault. It's because of you that Mom and Dad don't want me anymore. It's because of you that I look so awful." Although my parents divorced amicably, my mother had never truly gotten over it. After my father remarried soon after the separation, my mother became obsessed with the idea that my father and stepmother had secretly been involved even before the divorce. She despised mistresses and found it even more unbearable when she learned that her own daughter had become one. A wealthy businessman who regularly sent gifts during Amelia's live streams had become her top tipper. Unable to resist the temptation of the lavish gifts, Amelia agreed to meet with him when he invited her out. Despite knowing he was married with children, she became his mistress. I posted all the evidence online, and of course, my mother saw it. After that, my mother rejected Amelia as well. While I was standing under the spotlight, sharing our company's mission, Amelia was being taken away by the police. A month later, I visited Amelia in prison. She had lost a lot of weight and looked pale, with sunken cheeks. Through the glass, she spoke slowly. "I've lost again in this life. I've lost both Mom and Dad and myself. But I don't understand. Why do you always have to be better than me? Why do you always win? Is it because I'm just not good enough?" Her eyes immediately dimmed as she spoke. I shook my head and replied, "You are good, but you don't believe it. You've always compared yourself to me, relying on others' love for you to validate your own worth. Whether in this life or the previous, you've seen me as your rival and tried to chase me. But you've never lived your own life. You seem to think that as long as you surpass me, everything will be fine. Is that really the case? Without me, would Mom and Dad love you? Without me, could you get into a good university and succeed in your career? The biggest difference between you and me is that I focus on developing myself rather than constantly watching others." Tears filled Amelia's eyes as she quietly whispered, "It's too late for everything." I walked out, her wailing echoing behind me, but I didn't turn back. 1 year later, our company launched the Love Yourself Female Welfare Program. We set up free psychological lectures and shared knowledge about healthy diets. We also recruited volunteers and created offline mutual assistance groups with the goal of helping women without financial resources make positive changes.